Welcome to Tea Time. I am Miss Andrea.
And I'm Miss Mary.
And today we're going to discuss how COVID broke homeschooling.
Indeed. So get the picture. It's March of 2020, and everything is shutting down.
And the homeschool program that we had, we were forced to go over Zoom because we couldn't use our location.
We were meeting in a church at the time, and of course the church closed its building, and if they're not meeting for church, then outside groups aren't meeting for anything else.
So we're all in our homes, and I have some time to myself. And I'm on the homeschool message boards. And I'm like, oh no, this is going to be bad. So why do you think it was bad?
Well, I can think of a lot of reasons it was bad. I mean, I know why things went bad from my point of view. I have two children. One is an introvert, and actually he loved not going anywhere. The other is an extrovert, and about every 2 weeks we were on the floor in tears as I was holding him as he was crying because he needed that physical connection with other humans that was just not happening.
So I'm lucky to be an introvert from a family of introverts with the introvert last name.
Indeed.
So I was enjoying it, but I was reading these message boards and I was seeing, okay, we're doing homeschooling with the public schools. So right there I was like, stop.
Oh no, that's not what that word means.
We're not calling it that. That is not how any of it works. So I coined it. I put it all over the internet because I've been a blogger and I know how to get phrases out there. And so I was like, this is COVID schooling. If you are in public school and you're now online from home, what you are doing is COVID schooling. What we were doing was COVID schooling because we were used to being with kids in person, and now we were all forced onto Zoom. So COVID kind of took over. Keep talking. Okay. And so COVID just kind of took over education, and everybody was pretty much COVID schooling. So what happened is these parents were homeschooling their kids through public school, and then they were getting on the homeschool boards. And they were saying, my kid is stressed. This sucks. I'm not doing it. We're going to homeschool. What should I do?
There was some good advice.
Was there?
A little bit.
It was all bad.
Well, understand, the message boards are geared toward guiding people to actually homeschool.
Right.
And so in this moment in history, people who are frustrated with their kids sitting on a Zoom call with their traditional school teacher, and they're sitting in class just like they would be in class in a classroom, but now they're staring at a computer screen and nobody understands what's going on, and the teachers aren't equipped to teach this way, the students aren't equipped to learn this way.
And the parents were at home teaching anyway.
And so everybody's frustrated, everybody's upset. But anyone who takes a step back and looks at this situation logically understands that people who are responding in a reactionary sense to what's happening are probably not going to stay long-term actually homeschooling.
And so.
But the message boards don't understand that because the message boards weren't equipped for that, because the people on the message boards, they're committed to homeschooling. It's a way of life. It's a educational philosophy. It's not a passing fad or a knee-jerk reaction to an uncomfortable learning environment.
So at this point, we're in April of 2020. But I want to go back to March of 2020 for a second. And when I saw what was happening and I saw that everyone was being sent home, I said to myself, oh, this is going to be fine. What's going to happen is that everyone's just going to finish high school a year later. This year's gonna suck. Next year might suck. And everyone's gonna finish a high school a year later, and everyone's gonna be going to college at 19. That's what my brain thought should be happening.
Oh, because that was the logical.
That's not what happened. What happened was people said, I'm done. I've been teaching my kid myself. I'm trying to work. I'm exhausted. I'm tapping out. I'm going to homeschool. And the OG homeschoolers, I love you all with my whole heart and soul, said, cool, de-school them for the rest of the year.
You need to reset emotionally so that you can deprogram what the traditional schooling environment has ingrained into all of you.
And that would have been great.
If they were homeschooling long term.
I knew they weren't gonna. Like, homeschooling is hard. Homeschooling is a life change. Homeschooling is a whole new mental and emotional mindset.
It's a commitment.
My best advice in these circumstances is go to the library and get 20 books on homeschooling and start reading. Because if you don't change your mind, you're never going to change your habits. And so hundreds of thousands of kids came home to homeschool, and everyone had a party that lasted a year and a half.
Yeah.
And now, on one hand, I'm getting a bunch of kids who stayed homeschooling, thank goodness, because they're starting to make progress now, where normally you see homeschool progress in 6 months to a year. But I'm seeing a whole lot of kids who took all that time off and now won't do the work, especially the math work. We're going to have a generation of homeschool kids who refuse to do math, because that's something you have to do every day. That's a habit you have to have. And they broke the habit, and the habit hasn't been put back.
So let's kind of step back and talk about that,
Sure.
that party, because I think two things kind of got meshed there.
No, yeah, my brain was like, which way?
Right. So on the one hand, we have traditional school families that are instinctively reacting to the situation and diving into the homeschool community,
which is kind of brilliant,
without any real necessarily, I guess, intent to stay there long term.
No, without any understanding of what homeschooling really is.
Right. So you have that demographic, and then you have people who were homeschooling prior to 2020.
And doing a bang-up job.
And who had every intention of homeschooling afterward, and who understood what homeschooling is and what is involved in the whole process of homeschooling. Both groups had a party. It wasn't just one or the other.
Everybody had parties.
Everybody had a party.
Oh my.
We continued to teach classes over Zoom for our little co-op program.
We finished the year. And then we ended up doing a second year. But we did find a way to get kids in person.
We did. Whenever we could.
Teaching Shakespeare at the park is hard.
It is. They come, hard. They mow the grass while your students are trying to project Julius Caesar over the lawnmowers. It's fabulous. We staged a play at the end of the school year, right as things were starting to open back up. To the point that I wasn't entirely certain that we were going to have our venue, like right up until Tech Week. I wasn't entirely certain that the show was going to happen, though we had plans to perform it outside if, we couldn't get into the church where we were performing. So the greatest sadness that the kids had was that we only had the 2 performances. Yeah, they figured they'd put enough work into it that it should run longer than what we did. But we did. We managed to stage a play at the end of it all. So we did find ways, as things were starting to stabilize some, to get together as best we could. I mean, largely because of students like my child, who had to have that interpersonal connection and interaction. And that was just some of how we navigated that whole process. Part of what broke in all of this was the expectations for the type of work that needed to be done, the commitment, And this is happening again on both sides of the spectrum. The people who are joining the homeschool community brand new because, what the traditional schools are doing is not working for my child. And the long-term homeschoolers. Those expectations for continued study all kind of fell apart during this whole process. Even in families who had been homeschooling prior to 2020, even people who had solid routines, even if those solid routines were digital, students largely got out of the habit of completing regular work on a regular basis.
Well, I think it's because even as homeschoolers, we like to joke that we're never home. So homeschoolers were out and about so that they knew that I need to do my math, hit this, and that in this time frame.
Because I got somewhere to be.
Now, because they were home all the time, they would get to it whenever, and whenever never happened.
So the routines unraveled, and especially in things like math. If you don't have that solid routine, you slide backwards. You lose skills that you already acquired.
Lost ground because they were never performing. Because when we homeschooled, it was wake up, piano, math.
Right.
Now let's go do something. And so all those routine type things fell completely apart because we could watch Hamilton on Disney Plus as many times as we want to, which we did. Me and my grown children did. We did.
As many times as we wanted.
As many times as we wanted to. And so
we kind of lost in that moment this expectation of things that have to get done in order for learning to progress. And that kind of happened across the board, no matter
even in the
what
best
learning
case scenarios.
Right.
Even in the best case scenarios, but for me, it was like the mass exodus from school and everyone telling these people who didn't understand homeschooling to just chill all the way out.
Right.
And so then the next year when we opened back up, it was like, hey, we're bringing our kids to you to homeschool them. And I'm like,
that's not how this works.
What? No, you homeschool them. I help you.
Right. We teach this class.
No matter how much we said that, the parental expectation was so high. They're like, where's our report card? And I'm like,
you write that. That's we can give you our best guess on the work that we've seen. I can give you my feedback.
And it just became it in a lot of parents' minds. It was from public school to homeschool program, and now we're homeschooling. And so what they were really getting is they were getting a homeschool enrichment program only, but they were never getting the homeschool me.
Right. Because the parents didn't understand that
Which is,
they had to provide that.
What is the homeschool me? Family bonding, first and foremost.
Right.
Trust between the parent and child, right? And then through that relationship, you get to learn and grow together.
Well, and the ability to pursue passions and strengths that are unique to the child.
Right. And so they weren't getting any of that, but they were getting homeschool program. Oh, and by the way, we were just teaching history then. So.
Right. We didn't have math or science.
They were just getting some history.
Right.
And they were like, oh, this is Miss Andrea, my child's principal. And I'm like, no, I'm your homeschool partner, and so that's kind of how COVID broke homeschooling for public schools, and we kind of mentioned how it broke it for homeschoolers too, but the repercussions we just saw this year.
Right. So now here we are.
And they're back.
Here we are. Well, we started seeing it last year. We started seeing it last year.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2022, we were still like the students that we were getting in 2022.
Mm-hmm. We're hanging on to the last vestiges of maybe homeschooling will work.
Or we actively want to go back to school now, but my child is now behind because we weren't doing school.
Yeah, we had a couple of parents say,
didn't happen.
Hey, catch my kid up so I can put them back in school.
Right.
And I'm like, your child doesn't have any habits.
So we need to take time to develop those habits, because those habits can absolutely be developed. But all of this is a time thing, which just kind of goes back to those initial advice comments on all of the homeschool threads when people were pulling their kids out. Deschooling can be an excellent strategy for a student who is just really struggling in a traditional school environment.
Especially when it's an emotional struggle.
Especially when it's an emotional struggle. When your plan is going to extend over the next 4 years. Because homeschooling provides a unique opportunity to accelerate learning, because it's being done largely one-on-one, one-on-two. Like because you have such individualized attention as a homeschool student, accelerating is kind of a natural part of the process. So you can take the time to deschool, to decompress, to get some mental health back, to build relationships back, to build trust back. If your commitment is over a multi-year process, because it takes 2 years before you get to I left to now I am at least on par with where I should be. Because you're going to take some of that time to figure out what the student's strengths are, where the holes are, where do you need to start, how does the student learn best. All of that is going to, on the front end, pull things back from where society might expect the student to be, which again, because you're going to accelerate, that's okay, because by the time you get to the end,
if we're being completely honest, when you go from public school to homeschooling, you're going to lose 6 months to a year, and then you're going to start clicking forward, and it takes 2 years to see them gain that ground back, and then 3 years to see the magic.
Right.
We didn't get 3 years.
Yeah, this 2020 and COVID didn't provide that opportunity for that cycle to happen the way that it normally would happen. So in 2022, we had families who were like, well, I wanted to put my child back into a traditional schooling system, but now my child is not reading, doing math at this grade level, which is by age where he should be. The right answer is probably to put the child back in a grade lower than you think they ought to be.
But self-esteem.
Nobody did that. And I guess nobody did that because everybody figures, well, we all had this learning gap, and that's creating its own set of problems on the broader educational landscape. Because now a lot of these families that they really didn't have the lifestyle, they didn't really have the ability to homeschool the way that they thought they were going to, they're sending their kids back to traditional schools, and so now it's overwhelming these traditional school systems to bring in kids that now need remediation.
And so there are two things happening, and the first is those test scores are really suffering, and kids are about a year behind where they should be in reading, and maybe 2 years behind where they should be in math. The second thing that's happening is every homeschool family this year that I know of who tried to send their kid back to public school kind of low-key got rejected. And private school. They outright got rejected from the private schools, and the public schools had to test them in, or they had to go through an accreditor to get in.
Yeah, there were an unprecedented number of hoops.
And the schools got to say, we don't want, just like we had that big suck out of public school, we don't want a big flood in because we can't expand fast enough to handle this. So you might need to go back home and homeschool probably for a year, or or do online public school or something. So they're just right back where they started.
Right.
And like the schools right now, if they didn't trust homeschooling before, they really don't trust it now. And so that's how COVID broke homeschooling.
Well, that's some of it. So you were discussing capacity issues.
Yeah.
And so capacity issues are another way that COVID's kind of broken, I guess, schooling in general. Because when you had a flood out of the public school system, their capacity shrank. And there were homeschool co-ops, there were organizations that were designed to serve a certain size population. and all of a sudden now they've got all of these other students that, you know, are wanting these services. And so many of these homeschool organizations, many of these homeschool co-ops, they brought in staff, they got buildings, they expanded their programming to accommodate new families, which is growth, and that's how you grow, and that's great and all. But if these are families that didn't stick with it, you now have organizations that have payroll, that have rent, that have insurance, that have all of these expenses that were being covered when there were families paying into that program, that now those families, as they go back to public school, or as they go back to traditional schooling, you know, one form or another, those programs are left with expenses that they can now no longer cover.
Mm-hmm.
We know of several programs over the last few months that have closed their doors.
And that doesn't just hurt the administrators who put their life, sweat, and tears, and often their personal money into the program. That hurts the other 50% of students who were in that program before this happened and who want to stay in that program.
Right. And so now those families have to find some new solution for what they were doing. Mm-hmm. And there are also, I mean, there's a handful of organizations that are probably going to make it through this.
Yeah.
But they're having to adjust their expectations. They're having to adjust how they handle their money because their enrollment numbers are lower than they expected them to be. Mm-hmm. So it's this capacity shift that has damaged both sides of the spectrum.
So where do we go from here?
So where do we go from here?
We need some assessment time. Just from my analytical brain, I personally, for my students, feel the need to hire more teachers, hire parapros, get tutors in to get these kids that I have access to back on track, to build these habits and things of that nature. I think people seeing those successes will start to trust homeschooling again, because there's a lot of distrust of homeschooling right now. Something that we're doing is we're not trying to homeschool as a monolith, as we're this program and we're this great program and everyone should come to us. We're reaching out to all the other programs our size and building networks and coalitions so that we can support each other. Maybe my math teacher on Tuesday is your math teacher on Wednesday. We want our children to compete in science, in arts. So why don't we get together and have them compete against each other? So we're learning not to kind of operate as our own satellites, but as a small part of the whole. And so all these little homeschool communities that are formed are becoming part of a greater community. And honestly, I think that's how we survive, is if homeschoolers understand that whether our kids see each other every week or whether our kids see each other every 6 weeks or every month, we're part of one big community and we each have strengths that we can lend to each other. And I just think that that's going to build a lot of strength for us. As for the greater academic community, everyone needs to step back and then move forward. And I don't think people are going to do that.
Which is really interesting to me, because that seems like such a straightforward answer to some of this, especially like when you're talking about math. First off, that is the greatest struggle that we are seeing, is students who...
Because we can get them to write. We figured out ways to
get them to write. But also, with getting somebody to write, it's not as intimidating to, like, you don't necessarily have this... With writing, you have grade level milestones, but you can have writers at different levels critiquing each other's work, and it's not weird or, I mean, it's more... you have more understanding about writers who are working at different levels. So there's a more collaborative environment in which to develop that skill. So it's not as scary. In something like math, where if you don't understand those basic principles, you're not going to be able to learn the next thing.
Right.
Because math builds on itself. You know, language doesn't necessarily work that way. You can be strong in grammar without having the vocabulary and still work to build the vocabulary. Or you can be strong in the vocabulary without having the grammar, and you just need to do more editing now and go back and learn that grammar, and you can fix those mistakes. Math doesn't work that way.
I think that's the positive thing that comes out of the brokenness. I mean, it's scary as heck. But in the fact that homeschool math is kind of broken right now, we get to now try and work with them through the AI type deals where they can accelerate at their own rate, where we can pinpoint their weaknesses. We get to zoom in more on child by child and get, I mean, like, some children are gonna do calculus. Some kids are gonna get through geometry and want to do money math. First of all, we have to accept these kids as where they are, because their genius may not be in math.
Right.
Second of all,
but you need that basic foundation.
Yeah. Second of all, what was second of all?
Some kids might be a genius in math. The calculus kids. And then you have the kids that are going to get through just enough to get out of high school.
But second of all, we get to bring these kids that are capable of doing math, we get to pull them back to grade levels and then watch them soar forward. Because a lot of them are stuck in pre-algebra. And it's like, I can't divide fractions. I can't convert decimals to percentages. So I'm like, okay, let's go back. Let's go back 2 years. Oh, do you see how easy that was? You just accomplished a year's math in 3 months. And they're like, hey.
And that is, you mentioned something that's a really good point, because from where do we go from here? Thankfully, we are in an age where you do have these responsive learning tools. Some of them are starting to be powered by AI. Some of them are, just the things that have been in the works for a number of years. But you can put a kid on one of these computer platforms, work with them through their math, and
they still need a tutor,
because so a lot of responsive learning is going to be great for testing. It's going to be great for identifying strengths and weaknesses, but some platforms are just sort of okay at explaining a concept, and because everybody's brain works a little bit differently with math, and there's often 3 or 4 different ways to solve a problem. If you have, the videos with one particular explanation and that doesn't click for a child, you have to go find another explanation. And that's where having a hands-on tutor right next to them can really help figure that out, because you can explain something and then, okay, that didn't click, so let's try explaining it a different way. That didn't click. Let's see if explaining it this way works. And eventually you're going to figure out what clicks for that student. So the responsive technology is great, and it's super useful for where we go forward and how we kind of remediate our way out of this, because that's what honestly is necessary.
And it'll remediate them in reading comprehension also.
Yes.
Which is another area where we're seeing some problems, because they can phonics to death, but do they remember it 15 minutes later?
Right. And are they getting any meaning out of that?
Right. And so, yeah, I think technology is going to be a huge boost, but people have to let go of that notion that my child is in 9th grade. I can't have them go back and do 7th grade math because it's going to hurt their feelings. We need to take the grade levels off of this math and say, okay, you understand order of operations, but your problems keep ending up wrong because you're multiplying wrong. Let's go back and drill multiplication.
Right. Because math being what it is.
Because once you stop math, you lose the ability to multiply.
I mean, that's
why adults use calculators.
So much built on the basics and the foundation. And if you don't have that basic, then it's going to be very difficult to progress.
Yeah.
So it's very important to take a step back.
All of us, kids, homeschool kids, parents.
Yeah, because when you go back and you'll just pick a grade.
Oh yeah, no.
Every what, 2 or 3 months?
Yeah, I'm just like, I'm gonna do 5th grade today, and then the weekend's over and I finish 5th grade. But if you're teaching math, you have to go into like the Khan Academies of the world and refresh your skills. You know,
because if you're not using that
but
particular
I
skill every
refuse
single
to
day,
do the Duolingo streak. How dare they try to control me?
Streak is life. You have to appease Duo.
They're trying to control my life. I don't like it. But anyway, yeah. So that's how we feel. COVID broke homeschooling. We feel like people tried to jump into homeschooling, into the relaxed unschooling part of homeschooling, the very flowy part of homeschooling,
Right.
with no foresight on what they were going to do next, which was put their kids back. The end.
So,
That's a wrap.
if you enjoyed this video, which we hope that you did, we would love to see some comments in the comment section. We love to answer questions if you'd love to post some
It
there.
gives us ideas for future videos. If
It
you
does.
have an idea for a future video that you want us to talk about, also leave that as a comment.
Indeed. And we would appreciate if you would like or comment or share this video, because you know your friends want to see it.
Until next time.